Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Xiong. If you are able to watch news broadcasts inside China, you will see the United States in chaos, riots in major metropolitan areas, police brutality against African Americans, January 6th storming of the US Capitol, people die of hot weather because there is no air conditioning, or people freezing to death during the Texas power shortages. When Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi berated the United States, claiming the Black Lives Matter movement as evidence of its human rights abuse in a March meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Anchorage, he was celebrated by the Chinese media for highlighting the hypocrisy of the American government. Anger at multinationals pledging to no longer source cotton from Xinjiang in response to China's treatment of the Uighur minorities in the region has led to an angry backlash, with Chinese consumers burning Nike shoes and denouncing Swedish clothing retailer H&M. It is by design. The more negative news about the United States, the more capable the Chinese Communist Party look. It aims to convince the Chinese people that they should be pleased with their current leadership. This is important, as China has ever fewer supporters abroad, while US President Joe Biden works to strengthen alliances in Europe and Asia. A recent survey by Gallup revealed that American perceptions of China are at all-time low, worse than after the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. The Chinese people have typically viewed other nations, and particularly the United States, showing respect for China as a source of legitimacy for the CCP. It demonstrates its growing global heft. Today, it is even more important for the CCP to bolster popular support for the leadership because there is a growing list of challenges. China's economy is cooling down. The GDP grew by 6.5% in the final quarter of last year, even though it was much faster than almost any country. But the impressive numbers mask problems. In order to keep their economies humming during the pandemic, China's local governments built up a potentially destabilizing $2.3 trillion of hidden debt in 2020, according to a Bloomberg report citing a Chinese government-affiliated think tank. Income inequality in China has gotten worse thanks to a K-shaped recovery from the COVID-19 crisis that has mainly benefited the wealthy and jeopardized the household consumption of the less well-off. Last year, China's richest 20% had an average disposable income of over $12,000, more than 10 times that of the poorest 1/5. That figure surpassed the United States, where the multiple was about 8.4, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. As one study put it, the pandemic has exacerbated China's pre-existing inequalities. For now, Chinese leaders are touting their success in controlling the pandemic and returning the economy to normalcy faster than most of the world has. At the same time, Beijing has silenced questions about the COVID-19's origins and the government's initial cover-up of the outbreak. And even as China struggles to vaccinate its own people, it has sent Chinese-developed vaccines around the world as a gesture of its goodwill. Meanwhile, the Chinese media has denigrated US vaccines as unsafe. This year and the next are of critical importance to the CCP leadership. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, and the CCP has kept highlighting the elimination of extreme poverty, rising living standards, and economic growth among the nation's other successes. A party congress, China's top political gathering, will be held in the fall of 2022, setting key policies that will define China's future path and deciding the top leaders for the next decade. The Winter Olympics will be held in Beijing later next year. Do Chinese people support CCP? In any free society, it is a simple question answered by survey results, a research method used for collecting data from a predefined group of respondents to gain information and insights into various topics of interest. But the genuine and accurate Chinese public opinion in China is not possible. As the former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a speech, the CCP fears the Chinese people's honest opinions more than any foe. Last year, Harvard Ash Center released a study based on a decade-long survey of more than 31,000 Chinese citizens from 2003 to 2016. Researchers Edward Cunningham, Tony Sachs, and Jesse Turey found that Chinese citizen satisfaction with the government has increased virtually across the board. The study found, for instance, that public satisfaction levels increase as you go higher up the government chain of command. According to the survey, CCP's policies received the highest approval among Chinese, 93% in 2016. Since its release, the study has been cited by Chinese state media such as China Daily and CGTN as a justification for China's governance model. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying posted the Harvard study on Twitter along with a vindictive remark, "How about Washington?" When David Dodwell, a director of a Hong Kong think tank, cited a study to criticize Pompeo's stance on China, his words were quoted on Hua Chunying's Twitter account. I, for one, do not believe the study accurately measured the true public opinion in China. First, according to the report, the surveys were carried out by a reputable domestic Chinese polling firm, but no further elaboration was given. Approval ratings for U.S. residents across America's entire history average around 55% and have rarely crossed the 60% threshold. Approval rates for United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson stagnated around 50% last year, and Germany's Angela Merkel, whose ratings skyrocketed following her handling of the coronavirus pandemic, still obtained only 70% support. It is hard to believe so wide a difference between Chinese and Western leaders. The gaps seem to point to differences in the political system. Second, the Chinese Communist Party actively shapes public opinion. There is a strict online censorship rules, and the foreign medias are prohibited in China. It allows the party to control information flows and guarantees that the news about the government's actions is heavily sanitized. For example, during the Wenzhou train collision in 2011, where 40 people were killed, the Communist Party prohibited any coverage of the accident. The partial collapse of a residential building in Surfside, Florida has garnered widespread attention in China, and images of rescue workers combing through the debris have featured prominently on state media and nightly news programs. But amid intense focus on the tragedy in the United States, many Chinese internet users have questioned why a deadly incident at home has received such minimal media coverage and so little attention on social media. In the early hours of Friday, June 25th, a fire tore through a martial arts school in central Henan province, killing 18 students, mostly children, and injuring 16 others, according to a local government statement and a state media report. Under normal circumstances, such loss of life would be a major tragedy that both shocks and saddens the nation, dominating news headlines and social media for days. But with the Communist Party's all-important centenary just days away, such harrowing news is the last thing the party's propaganda apparatus wants to highlight, at least not when it occurs inside of China. The party not only erases negative news coverage but actively manufactures positive coverage by hiring spin doctors to promote them online. In 2013, Lu Wei, the former vice mayor of Beijing and the former deputy head of the propaganda department, trained over 2 million online propaganda workers to inject so-called positive energy into the opinions of the government. The citizens surveyed by the Harvard study were most likely honest about their support. Nonetheless, this does not confer any meaningful legitimacy if the evidentiary basis for the opinions was heavily doctored. If U.S. citizens are only allowed to read White House press release, to watch White House-approved news report, the current U.S. president, no matter who that is, will become the greatest, smartest, and most successful president in the U.S. history. Mr. Biden will no doubt enjoy an approval rating above 95%. Third, positive support for the Communist Party in the form of nationalism is actively encouraged by a system of patriotic education and social surveillance. Since the 1990s, the party has been actively engaged in a patriotic education campaign meant to instill nationalist views into Chinese youth. History textbooks overemphasize foreign aggression during what is now commonly known as the Century of Humiliation. This history presents the Communist Party as the sole defender of China's national interests since their victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949. Beijing has implemented the social credit system, which exacts punishment for all kinds of everyday behavior such as littering. The sense that one is constantly being monitored can assimilate the citizens into state-sanctioned behaviors and beliefs. With above all being said, Chinese people's lives have gotten better over the last few decades, and it is natural for the Chinese to take pride in the growing strength of their country. But positive sentiments can quickly evaporate. When a government is exposed as having misled or deceived its own people, such revelations can have lasting effects on government credibility and can erode citizen satisfaction with the government. Even more significant is the peril of elevated expectations. Many young Chinese have only known rising GDP and living standards. The CCP could face blowback if the economy slows substantially or, for example, following a failed Chinese military advance into Taiwan. The latter scenario would be an enormous blow to the prestige of a government that has based one plank of its legitimacy on reunifying a divided China and protecting the country's sovereignty. And the economic costs of an attempted invasion would damage the party's standing too. To consistently reinforce satisfaction and support, and it will continue to present the CCP with daunting challenges. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly.